Thank you very much, Ambassador Stefanini. It is actually a very fitting moment for me to take the floor because you have already outlined the political agenda for the modernization and the strengthening of the system of governance, of environmental governance. My talk will be mostly on the reasons why this strengthening is necessary. I would like to start with a very provocative reflection that environmental law as a whole is not a success story. It's not a success story as compared to other branches of international law. Despite the fact that we have been experienced a very wide proliferation of normative instruments, and despite the fact that we have an overabundance of treaties in this area, there are many shadows that we have to accept that still remain in this area of international law. The weakness of international environmental law derives, first of all, from its fragmentation and sectorial character, with the parcelization of the institutional mechanism for the implementations in a myriad of conference meetings and conference of the parties, hardly responsive to a coherent strategy. The second reason of the weakness is in the lack of what we call secondary rules on responsibilities for breach. We have actually very few international environmental law regimes that provide for a liability regimes. We have, of course, Basel. We have some a liability regime for the Antarctic. The Cartagena Protocol is now undertaking an exercise in this area toward the development regime, but as a whole we have a very weak system of liability in the field of the environment. But the most important weakness, in my view, is the lack of compulsory dispute settlement. This is a most severe handicap for two reasons. First of all, because we leave to the International Court of Justice or to other mechanisms of dispute settlement, such as the arbitration, the settlement of environmental disputes. But the most important weakness is in the fact that the lack of dispute settlement precludes the elaboration of the law, the maturation of the law through the judicial application. There is no system of law that can exist simply on the basis of the bare bones of the normative framework of substantive rules. We need to apply the law in order to understand what is the real content, the real reach of the law. And the lack of this prevents the environmental law system from maturing toward a very effective and modern system of law. It is clear if we compare this situation with what has happened in the field of human rights, where we have conventions that have been applied through decades of jurisprudential elaboration and have formed a very mature and complex system of law that today has a meaning for states, for individuals, for the society. The same applies to the WTO law. We have a system of compulsory dispute settlement that has already produced the dozens of reports of settlements of disputes and has provided a sophisticated elaboration at the jurisprudential level. And the same is true again in the field of foreign investments, where hundreds of arbitrations have produced an important body of law and have produced also the possibility of direct access to justice for private actors, investors, individuals and corporations. This is something that is absent in the field of international environmental law. The response, of course, has been to this gap has been rather weak. The International Court of Justice has taken up several cases and is becoming more active. Just a few days ago, a decision on an important environmental dispute, a pulp mill between Argentina and Uruguay, has been decided, a pending case on the spraying by Colombia, and the environmental effect across the borders is still pending. And of course, other cases in the past, like the Danube case, is still unsettled. At a diplomatic level, of course, we have witnessed the initiatives of the European Union. The French government has, of course, been involved in important initiatives. I had the honor at the European University Institute in 2004 and 2005, together with other colleagues, to prepare a preliminary study for the French government that then was used by the European Union. But of course, this has not produced a big roar for the time being, and it has still been left at the level of study and proposals. Interestingly enough, the most important effect of this development of international environmental law has been at the private law level. Interestingly enough, certain impact of international environmental law has been felt in the area of private international law from the point of view of expanding the jurisdiction of national courts with regard to environmental accidents or environmental injuries, by way of giving the affected parties, the injured parties, the possibility of choosing the most favorable forum. This has been an effect that has been particularly important in Europe. In other parts of the world, as in the United States, the Alien Tort Claim Act has been used in order to provide a sort of a universal, quote unquote, jurisdiction over environmental wrongs that have occurred in areas well beyond the forum. There is another important development, in my view, that we must keep in mind, and that is the development of transnational private regulations. In this field, we run the risk that governments may be overtaken by the private sector because we have a very active involvement of private actors, NGOs, and even business or corporations in the development of an environmental law that is not the traditional international environmental law, but a form of private transnational regulation. This is, of course, something that brings our subject very close to another subject, which is that of human rights. And yesterday we heard some interesting presentations that have highlighted the linkage between human rights and environmental law. And what we are discussing today has a certain resonance in the work that the Special Representative of the UN, Professor Ruggi, is doing with regard to the responsibility and accountability of business corporations in the field of human rights. The three pillars on which he's basing his study of the matter, the obligation to respect, the obligation to protect, and the obligation to redress. If we look carefully at the nature of the work, we can realize that it is very easily adaptable to the subject of our conference, environmental governance. But of course, the role of the private sector, for how important it may be, for how much important the role of NGOs is going to be, has a limit. And the limit, in my view, is the fact that transnational private regulation is seen with a certain distrust by governments, quite naturally, because governments and states are concerned with their own sovereignty. And globalization and transnational private regulation is certainly a threat to sovereignty, for better and worse. This is the reason why we should wake up to the necessity of developing effective governments at an intergovernmental level. Otherwise, some other solution will be found in a field that the governments will discover is already being occupied by the private initiative of corporations and NGOs. I would like to stop here because the lines of the possible reform, those lines of reform that we suggested in 2004 and 2005, and which were accepted largely by the European Union, will be illustrated by my colleague Federico Lenzerini, who has several slides for that purpose. Thank you very much.